See here, this is probably going to be one of the weirdest sermons you've ever heard in your life. I say that because a lot of us grew up in church. I know a lot of your guys' stories, and you went to Sunday school every week, and you went to the vacation Bible schools, and you know a lot of Bible stories, right? I could go on and list a bunch of Bible stories that you know, right? You probably know these stories better than I do. I didn't get saved till I was 17 years old, and so you guys have been this, double, triple my lifetime. Like I'm not that old, right? You guys have been entrenched in the Bible for a really long time. But whether you've been a Christian for a day or for 100 years, you probably know a lot of the Bible stories, right? Whether it just be through mainstream media or through whatever it might be, right? When I say these names of Bible stories, everybody's going to probably know what I'm talking about, right? When I say Adam and Eve, like most of you guys in here know what I'm talking about. I'm sure there's not very many that don't. Noah and the flood, right? Abraham and his many sons. You've probably heard that song as a kid, right? Abraham, right? The text we covered last week was a popular one, right? Jacob and his coat of many colors. The plagues of Egypt. Moses splitting the Red Sea. Right, Samson and his beautiful hair, David and Goliath, Jonah and the whale. Or I could go on and on and on of these Bible stories that you probably know. I can almost bet that whether it was through a kid's Bible or through Sunday school curriculum or through vacation Bible school, you've never heard the story in that context before that I'm going to go through today. So what's difficult, and we as a church, what we've committed to doing is opening up the Bible, and wherever it lands, we're going to say, this is why this is valuable to us. Well, sometimes the Bible is less like a kid's story and more like a rated R television drama. Today, if I had to, give it a TV rating, we'd be pushing the R label today, for sure. And I have to say some things that I don't necessarily want to say, just words that are really uncomfortable in church. And so if you've been here today at our church and you've heard me say things from the pulpit, you're like, man, this makes me really uncomfortable. You're probably going to feel that today because I have to say some things that are weird and that are awkward and that in the church context are typically not said. So hang on because it is what it is. Also, if this is your first time at this church, I apologize. This is going to be all kinds of fun. And so I'm probably overplaying it. But here's the beauty of what I'm saying. We believe that every word of the Bible, right, from the Bible stories that you've known your entire life to these more obscure, almost what's going to seem inappropriate stories, tell one beautiful story, which is the story of a Savior who loves his people. And so that's what we're going to dive into here this morning. We've been back studying verse by verse through the book of Genesis for the last 2 years, and now we're in the home stretch. We're studying the life of Joseph, right? The guy with his coat of many colors gets sold into slavery and ends up in Egypt, right? And that's where we started the story last week. We have this 17-year-old boy and his brothers, right? He's kind of a punk, aggravating them, and they strip him of this beautiful coat that his father gives him because he's his favorite and sell him to Egypt. Right, so that's the story we just finished last week. Now, chapter 38, the Bible almost jumps randomly. And it doesn't continue the story of Joseph, but instead it jumps into this weird little side arc, per se, of the story of Judah. And so we're going to work through this story of Judah today, which is going to seem very random, but I don't believe is random. I think Moses has a perfect intention in putting this here. But as I said, hold on to your seats because this is going to be a lot of fun. So let's jump into it. Genesis chapter 38, verse 1. It happened at that time that Judah, right, that time being the time that Joseph was sold into slavery, Judah went down from his brothers and turned aside to a certain Adullamite whose name was Hira. There, Judah was the daughter of a certain Canaanite, saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite woman whose name was Shua. He took her and went into her, and she conceived and bore a son and called his name By the way, I've said this 100 times. Don't necessarily use the Bible to name your children, especially not after Judah. He picked some pretty bad names. And he called his name She conceived again and bore a son and called his name Onan. Yet again she bore a son and called his name Shelah. It's probably Shelah, but it's funnier to say Shelah. Judah was in Chezib when she bore him. So, what's the purpose of this kind of, what happens in a lot of the chapters, right? This is kind of the reason that those who have translated it to English have broke it up this way, is because it almost sets the context with the first couple verses. So what's going on here? What sets the scene for what is going on here? So the idea here is Judah's going his own way. That's what the writer's trying to get across to us. Right? He's no longer living in the land of his father, right? That's how we know he's following God's plan. He wants to be, have God's will over his life, but instead he's saying, I want what I want. Right? He's not where he's supposed to be. Judah has gone down, and the Bible uses this language to show that he's straying away from God. He's getting away from God and his purposes for his life and pursuing his own thing. For example, if you remember the stories, it says Abraham went down to Egypt. It says Isaac went down to Gerar. Right? It says that Dinah went down to Shechem. You can see the connection. That while they go, yes, it's locationally down, but it also is showing that they are separating themselves from God's will for their life. And so, right, that's the context of what's going here. He's turning away from God and God's design for his life, and he's living his life how he wants to. Right? When I think of Judah, right, we know post Christ that this is the line by which Christ comes from. Right? He's the descendant of Judah. So I almost assume he's pursuing, he's a great godly man and going to do all the right things. This is going to turn into a train wreck quick. Right? He's looking for happiness outside of God and his design for his life. And look at this language. See if this strikes your attention any. Right? As I've talked about a lot, Genesis always, almost in every section, points us to somewhere else that has already happened in Genesis in order to cause us to remember something. Like, for example, it says, he saw, he took, he went into her. Right? That's the same language as Adam and Eve when they ate the fruit. He saw, he took, he ate. Right? That's the same language when what happened to Dinah. Right? He saw, he took, he. I don't think in this text that Judah necessarily took advantage of Shua here, but what I think it's trying to get across to us is this is happening fast. That there's lustful intentions linked to this. That he sees, he acts, he's attracted, boom. I'm going to do all the things I want to do, and it happens very quickly. Right? I don't know about you, but our culture, that's typically the way sex works. You see, you want, you take, and so on from there. Right? That's what lust is. It says, I see something, I get it. There's not a whole lot of planning, not a whole lot of doing. So their relationship that's what sets it up. It's based on attraction. It's based on these lustful intentions. He took, he saw, just all happened so fast. Right? And this goes on for years. Right? This marriage that he came into based on attraction goes on, and we can see that there's some repercussions. Right? He has multiple kids. It's almost based on attraction. Now he's in this marriage. It's probably not the greatest. Right? It's all kind of difficult. But that's the context where we're at. He's somewhere he's not supposed to be with someone he shouldn't be with. Right? God has reserved for the Canaanite or for his people to be with his people. Right? They're supposed to marry in the family of the Jews, which is where Jew, right? That's how we get the term Jew. It's the descendants of Judah. And so, right, he's supposed to be in the faith. He's not. He's with the Canaanite woman. And so that this whole context of this is jacked up. He's running away. He's doing what he wants. He's living in rebellion. Verse 6, it says, and Judah took a wife for don't name your kid that, his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. Okay? So this is the first time in the Bible we see God kill someone. And it really doesn't give us a reason. It just says, the Lord put him to death. Right? Oftentimes when Christians think of the Old Testament, this is probably the God that comes to mind. He's angry, he's mad, he's doing things that he wouldn't do now because of Jesus. So what is going on here, right? Why is God being this seemingly angry God who kills people when they do wrong things? Right? This begs some questions that we've got to answer. What do we do with this? Right? Why would God kill someone? Because they did something wrong. Why does he not do that today, right? I thought God was love, and he gave everyone the right to make a decision about what happened with their life and so on. Right? I could go on. Here's what I want to get at. The God of this text is the same God as today. Right? He doesn't have a different heart posture towards sin than he did now. Right? So here's what I want to get at. We sin every single day. I do. I don't know if you do. I'm sure you do. If you say you don't, you're lying to me. Right? We sin every single day. Why does God not kill us? My answer is going to be he could. And he would have every right to. Does he do it all the time? No. Does he have every right as a perfect, holy, just God to put me to death for my sin? Absolutely he does. That's what this text is trying to tell me. My sin separates me from God. It's an absolute abomination to God, whether it be some big sin, some little sin. I think it's purposeful that the writer doesn't even tell us how he sinned. It's just he's a sinner. He's separated. He's broken. We don't need to know how, because it doesn't matter whether it's the biggest or the smallest. It's not necessarily the offense that matters, it's who you've offended. And we've committed treason against the God of the universe, and he has every right to put us to death because of our sin. Every right. Right? That doesn't have to be, when we think of the death penalty, right? It's the worst things you can absolutely imagine. But when it comes to God, every sin comes from the same heart posture that causes the worst types of sin. Right? All sin comes from this same point, which is where Judah's heart is. From the same point as, I don't want God, I just want his stuff, and I just want what I want. Right? That's where all sin comes from, is this underlying intention that I just want what I want. I don't care who God is or what his design is for the world. And he kills Ur. Right? Right? God hates sin, and he will deal with it. Right? Today, if God decides in his grace to bypass your sin and doesn't kill you, which he has the right to do, there will be a day by which it's dealt with. Right? And you guys know I'm not a hellfire and brimstone preacher. But the reality is, if we are in our sin without some intermediary to deal with our sin, the eternal punishment is hell. Eternal separation from God. Hell is a reality. God hates sin. My question for you today is, what kind of God do you have? Do you have this almost weak, sensitive God who wants just everybody to be in heaven? Or do you have a God that takes sin seriously? That he's not going to be wrong, and he's not going to live with injustice. He's going to deal with it rightfully. Oftentimes, we in 2025 forget that that's the God we have. Right? This is heavy. This is hard. He deals with sin seriously. Sin is not just something that we sweep under the rug, but it has real consequences. And we see them in this passage. The right of God to do away with sin. Right? Let that be heavy. Right? Let that's who God is. It's not just in here for no reason. And this isn't the end of it. It says, then Judah said to Onan, verse 8, go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her and raise up offspring for your brother. Right? This is something that seems super strange. Like, for example, if my brother died, I'm probably not going to, have kids with his wife, right? You probably wouldn't either. Like, that's not a cultural thing that we do anymore. But the idea here is God in Deuteronomy gives us in this rule what's called levirate marriage. And what that means is you have this familial calling responsibility to make sure that your brother's line goes on. Yes, you're with his wife, but it's a way that his blessings can be given, right? That because he was a son, like, he has rights. He has the promise of a firstborn, which is like a certain portion of the father's inheritance, right? Like, for example, Jacob, which is Judah's father, is still alive. Therefore, he's going to pass on the larger portion of the blessing onto Judah. Judah's firstborn is going to pass his blessing on, right? And so we see the children of Tamar are going to be the ones that inherit the blessing. Does that make sense? Hopefully that's helpful. And so what's going on here is they're saying you need to be with Tamar, who is your brother's wife, so that these blessings can go on, that the line of Judah through the firstborn can go on. Like, that was the rule that God gave. Very confusing, right? This is not necessarily a cultural overlap that we have right now. So what he's saying is God has called you Onan to be with Tamar. Right? You need to fulfill your duty, which not only provides a offspring for your brother to have, to bless and to give his things to, but also, like, you have to remember, there's a messianic tie to this thing as well. That back in Genesis 3, God gives Adam and Eve sin, right? They eat the fruit when they shouldn't eat the fruit. And who are they convinced by? Satan, right? Satan in the garden is a serpent, and he comes and he deceives them, and God gives the serpent a promise. And that promise says, from Eve will come the one who will crush your head, right? And that means that literally they're going to give birth and give birth and give birth until Jesus comes. And we're going to actually go through that here at the end, which will be interesting. And so in a real way, this messianic forebearer will come from Tamar because she's the one that should receive the blessing. Right? We can see that's the intention. That's why I think God goes through all these hoops to make sure that it happens. And so what happens next, that's the context. Right? Because this next verse is the one that I don't really want to read, to be honest. Right? That's the context, that you have this weird marriage between a brother-in-law and a sister-in-law, and he's supposed to give her offspring so that the blessing can continue on. It says, but Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, so whenever he went into his brother's wife, he would waste the semen on the ground so as to not give offspring to his brother. Some of you guys already feel awkward that I said semen at church. Well, I don't want to hear it because none of you guys had to say it. And so, right, this is weird, right? Onan does this thing, and we're going to see that he gives the same consequences that he did because of this thing is going on, right? Very strange. What do we do with this? What does this mean? What is the sin going on here? Essentially, if we look at Hebrew language, this is why Hebrew language matters so much. When we read this in English, it reads like a one-time thing, right? That he went the first time they were together. But this is like the tense in Hebrew essentially means this is ongoing. This isn't something that happened once. This is happening over and over and over again, right? So that changes the perspective a little bit, doesn't it? That it goes beyond just this one-time weird thing, but this almost scratching the edge of sexual abuse. That she's coming into this assuming that she's getting a kid from it. Like, that's her only intention. She wants a kid from Onan. He wants the sex, but doesn't want the responsibility. Anybody else ever heard of that going on in our culture? Right? He wants the things that happen. He wants the sexual encounter, but he doesn't want the responsibility that's attached to it, which comes with kids, which comes with blessing, which comes with all the stuff. Right? It's an ongoing thing. The issue isn't the action. The issue is heart posture. Right? We talk about this all the time at this church. Actions are actions. They're just a result of something that's actually going on underneath. Like, for example, this is always the example I give. If I want to walk back and punch Jesse Burrell in the face, right, what's the sin? The sin's whatever caused me to punch him, right? The punching itself is just the action that outflowed. But there's something happened in Onan's heart, right? And so, essentially, what's going on here is he's selfish. He's against God and God's plan. Potentially, he's doing this so that he can get the blessing, or so that his kids will get the blessing. Because if he doesn't give Tamar a child, then does it just go on down to him and his kids? Probably. So there's almost this self-intention of he gets the most money if he doesn't do it. And then also, like I said, he's sinning against God here. This is God's plan. This is what God has called out. And God won't let the wickedness of man thwart his plan. So verse 10, it says, and he did what was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death also. So, right, despite necessarily what the underlying sin is, he's disobeying the God of the universe and is rightful to die for it. Right? Sin is serious. Do you take sin seriously? Verse 11, then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow in your father's house till Shelah, my son, grows up. For he feared that he would die like his brothers. So Tamar went and remained in his father's house. Right? Just a quick side note here. This is a big lie. Right? He's just telling her this to get her out. he doesn't value her. He doesn't give her any love. He doesn't, necessarily say, you've had now 2 husbands that have died. I'm sorry, let me care for you. Instead, he sends her back home because he's afraid that his other son, who I assume is just as sinful as the other 2, right? That's why he kind of protects him, I think. And he's like, I know he's going to do the same thing, therefore, get out of here, right? You can see just all that he's doing everything he can to protect his sinful children. It's really just a broken situation. So time goes on. It says, in the course of time, the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, died. When Judah was comforted, he went up to Timnah the sheep shearers, he and his friend Hira the Adullamite. Right? You might not see this initially, but if we jump to 1 Samuel, we're going to see there's probably a lot more going on here than just sheep shearing. Right? 1 Samuel tells us that this is more of a party than it is like they're just going to shear the sheep. Like all the boys get together and they drink and they party and they live it up. Like that's what we see. David goes to a sheep shearing party in 1 Samuel, and so we know it's not good, right? So he's going down here to have a good time with his boys. And who is his friend? Hira the Adullamite. That probably doesn't mean anything to you when I say that, but this word Adullamite should kind of spark our attention a little bit, because this is in the land of Canaan, which means he's buddied up with these guys who aren't even following the same God that he is. Right? These are his friends. This is the core group that he is now running to to be comforted. This is the core group that he's running to care for him. This is what he's doing now when he needs, do you see that? He's not running back. When his mother dies, he doesn't call up his brothers and say, hey guys, I've been living a sinful lifestyle. I'm going to, instead he runs to his buddies to party. Right? And what happens next even confirms it, right? Verse 13, it says, and when Tamar was told, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep, she took off her widow's garment and covered herself with a veil. You thought it was bad before, just wait. Wrapping herself up and sat at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah, for she saw that Shelah was grown up and she had not been given to him in marriage, right? So she knows it's a lie. She knows it's gone on too long. He had never had any intention of giving her that son. So she starts coming up with this plan, right? She starts changing clothes, and we don't quite see what's going on. And then verse 15, it says, when Judah saw her, he thought that she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. He turned to her at the roadside and said, right, this is some, real good sweet talk here. Come, let me come into you, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. Right? How wild is this? So what's going on here? Tamar dresses up like a prostitute, simply stands in the corner, and he comes up, and his wife, put this whole thing together. His wife has just died. His boys have just died. What does he do? He runs and is trying to sleep with a prostitute. It's the craziest story, right? And my question is, how did she know this would work? How did she know that she could pull this off? Think about it. She just knows that he's going to shear his sheep. So my guess would be that's just the type of character he had. It probably isn't the first time he's been to a prostitute. Right? She just knows that he's going up here. This has happened time and time and time again. This is the type of person Judah is. It says a lot about the character. And then what does she say? It says, she said, what will you give me that you may come into me? Right? She wants payment for the prostitution. Right? She's got this whole plan. The whole thing is a mess. Verse 17, it says, he answered, I will send you a young goat from the flock. She said, if you give me a pledge until you send it. He said, what pledge shall I give you? She replied, your signet and your cord and your staff that is in your hand. So she gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. Then she arose and went away, and taking off her veil, she put on her garments of widowhood. Right, so Judah, the great patriarch, right, sleeps with a person that he presumes to be a prostitute. Right, she wears this veil, pretending to be someone other than she is. Does this story sound familiar to another story that we've covered not that long ago? Right? See where I'm going with this? Somebody else is tricked by a veil into sleeping with somebody that they're not supposed to sleep with. Right? This is the same exact thing that happened to his dad. Right? Jacob goes to take Rachel, and what happens? His father-in-law slips in another woman, her sister Leah, and she gets her pregnant, knowing that Right? And who's the woman that did it? It's Judah's mom. Right? All these connections are crazy to me. Right? Judah's mom is Leah, which is the one who fooled Jacob. All these connections just show like God's people need to learn a lesson. My goodness, can we not sin over and over and over and over and not see that we should not do the same things over and over and over? I don't know about you, but typically when I sin, it's something that I've done over and over and over, and I just never learn from it. Why is that the case? Right? The answer is because we don't take sin seriously. We don't look at these verses and say, this isn't good for me. This is bad for me. This is leading to death at some point. Maybe I won't die. God seems to bypass our sin a lot these days. Or I'd be dead. You would too. But, we should take it seriously. And so, it doesn't, right? And we see any risk you have when you have sex is you have a kid, right? That's risk that you take every time you do it. And so she's pregnant, right? It's just wild. Verse 20. When Judah sent the young goat by his friend, the Adullamite, to take back the pledge from the woman's hand, he did not find her. And he asked the men of the place, where is the cult prostitute who was at Enaim by at the roadside? And they said, no cult prostitute has been here. I think this is interesting. I'm not a Hebrew scholar, right? I'm not trained in that. I'd like to be. But I did a little research this week based on a sermon I heard. If you look at verse 15, so go back up to 15, you're going to see it says he thought she was a prostitute. See it there? All right, then you jump back to verse 21, and it says, where's the cult prostitute? My brain says, why are these different? Why is it different? So the terms are different. So the question is, what is a cult prostitute versus a prostitute? Well, a cult prostitute, this is interesting. Where are they? They're in Canaan, that's what we call it around here. It's Canaan in the Bible, right? They're in Canaan, and what they did in that religion is they had cult prostitutes, which were these women that worked for the temples that would sleep with the men as an act of religious worship. And so it switches. Here's what I think is going on, right? Maybe this is a little pastoral imagination. Like I said, this may not be 100% true, but this is what I take from the passage. I think he approaches her thinking she's a regular old prostitute. He just wants to sleep with her. He just wants to do whatever. And then when he tells his buddy, he almost twists it a little bit. His buddy is a Canaanite. He probably holds that religion. So he turns it into this religious thing. Right? He takes what was just a sinful intention and turns it into some religious action. Oh, well, I was just sleeping with a cult prostitute. I bet his buddy probably doesn't even know what God he worships. So I think he's almost just telling him this story. Right? This is what we do when we want to pursue our sin. We make it a Christian thing. Right? For example, and this is a real story. I had somebody come to me and say, I feel called to divorce my husband. God has called me. He's told me that it's very clear that I should do this. Well, then I open the Bible and say, I see it very clear that he didn't. Right? We use religion to try to cover up the things we want all the time. Right? We use religion to cover up gossip. Well, I just really want to make sure they're okay. So we just talk crap about them, right? Bless her heart, whatever. Right? From small things to big things, we try to use religion to cover up what we actually want to do. That's the sinful heart, is we're going to get what we can get, what we want. Just like Judah wanted the woman when he first moved there. We're through whatever means, even if it means twisting a religion around to get there. Right? I think that's what he's doing here. I think that's why the word changes. It seems just kind of weird, doesn't it, that they would use a different word. And so I think he tries to almost make it a religious thing. So they can't find her. Verse 22, so he returned to Judah and said, I have not found her. Also, the men of the place said, no cult prostitute has been here. And Judah replied, let her keep the things as her own, or we shall be laughed at. You see, I sent this young goat and did not find her. I think he's like, well, I tried. Off the hook now. She's gone. She can keep the stuff. Just make sure no one hears about this. Right? Just make sure no one knows, and so on. About 3 months later, verse 24, Judah was told, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral. Moreover, she is pregnant by immorality. And Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. All right, so 3 months go by, and for him, it's like it never happened. Right? He's just living life regularly. He went and sheared his sheep and hung out with his buddies, right? He's just living life of sin without even batting an eye to it. Doing whatever he wants to do, living life however he wants to live it, right? He hears that Tamar is pregnant, and that seems like kind of random, but this would have been a big shame for his family. Like, he has been called to care for her, to make sure she has kids, and now she's pregnant by somebody else, and he's like, she's bringing shame on me and my family. You see just how wild this is? Right? It's a big disgrace in his culture that he didn't care for her. So he's saying she's cheated on her promise to bring forth children for my son. She's doing it through someone else, but he's the one that's kept her from doing it. You can see how it all kind of works together here. Right, so what's his solution? He's going to burn her to death. Right? And if you look, there is a couple, like in the Old Testament, there is a couple like things by which burning is an option. This is not one of them. This one was like very low on the totem pole of reaction. But I want you to be honest with yourself here. Because while this is maybe we could take as an extreme version, how often do you do this? How often do you ignore your sin, pretend it doesn't exist, and when you hear someone else has done something, you just lash out? Especially if it goes against you and hurts you in some level. Right? We just pretend our sin doesn't exist, right? I think Jesus says something about this, something along the lines of, don't you think you should pluck the log out of your eye before you take the speck out of somebody else's? But this is like idea that we always do this. We get mad about what someone else is doing, especially if it has wrong to do with us. But here's the reality. Your secret sin is as hated by God as someone else's public sin. Right? We have all these sins that if somebody knew about, I want you to be honest in here today. Check your own heart. We all have these probably secret sins that we don't want to tell anybody about. We knew if it got out, we'd be ruined. But the minute that someone else is their public sins on display, we want to talk about it. We want to cast them down for it. When the thing that we do, if it got out, would wreck us. Check your heart here today. Right? We all have those things. Verse 25. As she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, by the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant. And she said, please identify whose these are, the signet and the cord and the staff. Then Judah identified them and said, she is more righteous than I, since I did not give her my son Shelah. He did not know her again. Right? She got him. She crafted this whole plan. She knows his character, knows that he's going to be sinful, and the whole plan goes perfectly. And what does he do? I love the way he reacts here. I honestly do. We all are incredibly jacked up, do wrong things all the time. If we would just act more like Judah and be honest about it, our lives would probably be better. Right? He says, she is more righteous than I. Right? Oftentimes in our life, no one's more righteous than we are. And so, verse 27, let's finish out the chapter. It says, when the time of her labor came, there were twins in her womb. And when she was in labor, one put out a hand, and the midwife took and tied a scarlet thread on his hand, saying, this one came out first. But as he drew back his hand, behold, his brother came out, and she said, what a breach you have made for yourself. Therefore his name was Perez. Afterward, his brother came out with a scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah. Right? So she has these twin boys. Judah now has two more sons with his daughter-in-law. So did you hear about this story in Sunday school growing up? Right? Probably not. Right? So what do we do with this? What do we do with this text? Right? This wild set of verses that if you read, it's almost like, this is nuts. On to the next chapter. Read about Joseph, who actually does some good stuff. What do we do here? I want to give us three things that I think are evidently clear in this text that we need to hold to. One, as I've beat up a lot, sin is serious. Sin is serious, right? We don't just do whatever we want without consequences. There will be consequences. God deals with sin harshly, as he rightly should, because we've broken his law, which is the flourishing of humanity, right? We should right to die because of his sin. Why would Judah not die? That's the question I want to ask. Why would Judah not die here? Why would Judah not die? I mean, what he's done, in my opinion, is probably worse then the boys, why would he not do this? And here's what I think. I think it's because of the promise. Judah should die for his sin. He's wicked in the eyes of the Lord too, but he believes in the promise. As damaged as he is, as broken as he is, and God is using him to bring about the Savior of the universe. Right? Verse 2, while sin is serious, or point 2, while sin is serious, God seriously loves sinners. Right? This story seems random in here. It seems like, why would they cut the story of Joseph in order to talk about Judah? And the reason is because Judah is going to be the means by which the world is saved. He's going to be the means by which Jesus comes. So we have to know how this comes about. So Moses inserts this story, which seems random, in order to show what's called the scarlet thread. Hence, we even see that term here in the text. That through this weird, jacked up, strange situation will come the Savior of the universe. How weird is that? Right? Matthew 1, it's not going to be up there. We're going to see there's only 5 names of women in this whole thing. Only 5 names of the men are mentioned. Abraham's mentioned, Jacob's mentioned, and those 2 we don't see Sarah, we don't see Leah, or Isaac. I skipped him. But then we're going to go on down, and 5 women are named. Ready? Tamar. Tamar is listed in Matthew 1 as a descendant of Jesus. How wild is that? Ready? And I'm gonna keep going here. Ready? Rahab. Anybody know that story, right? Another prostitute. Ruth. That one's like, Logan, how are you going to get there? If you guys remember, months ago, we studied Lot. What does Lot do? Lot sleeps with his daughters. They get him drunk. They trick him into having sex, just like this story. They trick him into having sex. They get her pregnant. One of the sons' name is Moab. Ruth is a Moabite. Ruth's the descendant of Lot. How nuts is this? Right? And then Bathsheba is the next one. Right? It says, and it doesn't even say her name. It says Uriah's wife. Right? What is going on? And then Mary's the last one. Right? These first 4 are arguably involved in the deepest parts of sin that we see in the Bible, right? Whether it was done to them or that they committed it, right? Tamar is probably sexually abused by Onan, and maybe his brother too, right? Maybe that's the sin that got him to be killed too. We don't know. Rahab, who was a prostitute, Ruth, whose descendants are Lot, Bathsheba, who was probably raped by Joseph. Right? What does all this matter? Here's what I want to get at. Jesus used who seemed to be the worst sinners to bring about the greatest glory. Right? He uses the worst sinners to bring about his greatest glory. And so here's what I want to say. God still does that. God still uses those who maybe we're all the worst sinners, but the ones who you can see it. The ones that is absolutely evident in order to bring about the best purposes, right? God uses selfish, broken people, right? He uses those who have been abused. He uses abusers. He uses those who are stuck in substance abuse. He uses, and I could go on a million, anybody, the worst things you could think of, those are the people that God chooses to bond himself to. Right? And then you could go through the life of the males in that passage. Every single one of them damaged beyond belief. Jesus came for liars. He came for cheats. He came for rapists. He came for murderers. He came for me. He came for you. Right? All people in Jesus' lineage are broken, and he could use them for the world's greatest gifts. And so what I want to say today is oftentimes when it comes to church, a lot of people avoid it because they say, I'm too broken. I've done too much. God will never forgive me. There's no way that me with my lifestyle can know Jesus. You're wrong. And I promise you're wrong. This text shows us how wrong you are. You cannot do enough to escape God's grace. He loves you and he came so that you can have life. So here's my last point. Like Judah, I want to call you to repent today. That yes, God hates sin and loves sinners, but he doesn't save us so that we can continue to walk in our sin. Right? Sin is not just generally doing something bad. It's antithetical to true life. Like, you want to live true life. Like, trying to live in sin and be a Christian is like trying to run a race and breaking your own legs. It just doesn't make any sense. Like, why would you want to do that? Like, I want to call us to cast away the sin that is in our lives so that we can see Jesus. We try to somehow blend the two. We want short-term pleasure and we want the long-term satisfaction of Christ. So we try to make them work together, but they don't. We're selling ourselves short. Right? C.S. Lewis says this. He says, "We are half-hearted creatures, fooling about with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered to us. Like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in a slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of holiday at the sea. We are far too easily pleased." Right? And here today, God is calling you to turn away from your sin and turn to Him and receive real life. Not life that you think you can gain for yourself by short-term pleasure, but infinite, long-lasting, perfect, eternal joy with Him. All right? So I want to say, stop the gossip. Stop the pornography. Stop looking to substances to sustain you. Right? Stop doing whatever it is that you're doing that is clearly sin, because Jesus has better for you. But you're going to say, look, I've tried that over and over and over, and I keep failing. He loves sinners. Recycle, repeat. Right? You come to Him and you repent again, and we're going to be broken again, and we constantly come to Jesus and fight against our sin. It's going to be this ongoing process. That's the beauty of who Jesus is. He doesn't give up on us when we don't do it perfectly. Right? He uses the Judas. He uses the us. And Judah went on with his sin for years. We need to put our hope in the finished work of Jesus, because He is better than what we think we can gain for ourselves. And so I know some of you in here today are looking for truth, trying to figure out what life's about. So you stumble in here on a Sunday morning. What am I doing? What's life all about? My circumstances have kind of shook me. Where do I go from here? I just wanted to remind you, look no further than the cross of Christ. That's what life is about. That's where infinite holiness is found. That's where purpose is found. That's where forgiveness is found. Look no further than the cross. Right? The quote I always say, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Right? Without Jesus, there is no going. Without Jesus, there is no knowing. Without Jesus, there is no living. Put your hope in Him today. Right? And this is not just a call to non-Christians. This is a call to Christians that what sin are you sweeping under the rug here this morning? What thing in your life are you pretending is okay? Because nobody knows about it. Right? God knows. He knows. We are called to put that sin to death so that we can know Him and love Him and walk with Him. Say, we need to come to Him just as Judah does here, saying, I'm not as righteous as He, as Jesus, who has done it all for me. Give me His righteousness. That's what I need here today. And allow me to fight against my sin. So hopefully, with this wild text, we can see that what we need is Christ and His forgiveness in our lives. So, next week shouldn't be as crazy. So if this is your first time, come back and witness a regular church service. Just kidding. God, join me in prayer. God, thank You for the Bible, as wild as it can be at times, as maybe seemingly gruesome as it could be, that every word screams the beauty of Jesus. My life is broken. My life is damaged. If you were to have a book about me in the Bible, it would be damaged too. All of ours would be. We might pretend it isn't. But when you cut through to the thing that is unseen, especially the heart, we see that we're all broken and damaged and need Your grace. Help us to look upon this story and know the absolute hate that You have for sin. And that we are not called to pursue sin, but to pursue You and to walk with You. And then even when we fail, because of the finished work of Jesus on the cross, we have received His righteousness, not mine, and therefore You look upon me and consider me clean. We love You. Thank You for our time together. Amen.